Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 23rd of June, 2014, just after 1 o'clock. Sorry about that. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, and with me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Well, first of all, we're just going to say very hot and sunny here in Plymouth and extremely hot under the lights in a tiny studio. So bear with us if we start to...
Tiny?
Sorry, $1 million, 4,000 square metre, 40,000 square metre studio here in Plymouth. If we start to swelter a little bit under the spotlights, you'll know what's causing the problem. Well, our theme today is really going to be the media, the danger of the media, and if we lose free reporting, things are going to get very, very dangerous indeed very quickly. So let's run into things, and we'll start you off with a front page of the latest UK column. Now, we've been warning about the reset, which we are describing as a wolf in sheep's clothing. We're not going to go further into reset today. We'll simply say, well, what's the real thing going on? It's basically the undermining and destruction of both the Constitution and in particular Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights. But when we put the UK column out on the streets, very interesting feedback. So this is the analysis of an early morning poll, a conversation between dog walkers. The gentleman said, I've just read the UK column. I asked, have you, and what did you think? And the reply was, it's extreme. Now, this was a very interesting response. What does that mean? Don't you believe what it says? It's extreme. What do you think is untrue? Silence. What does it say that is untrue? Silence. And finally, people will not believe it. And I think in that short conversation, there is some real truth about the state of people in UK at the moment, that if you put real truth in front of them, they immediately say, whoa, I can't take that, it's extreme, or I don't believe it. But when pushed, it wasn't that this individual didn't believe what was being said in the paper. It was obvious that it was too frightening. So there we are, the truth, a very dangerous weapon, and it's the biggest weapon that we've all got, so keep speaking out. Well, what's the aim of the game? The New York Times here just said that basically the lack of major wars could be hurting economic growth. And really, you can't say any more than that, because it gives us a perfect snapshot into why the global elite and certainly the banksters need so many wars in order to ramp up the profit. I think you're going to take us on from there, Mike.
Well, indeed, because John Kerry has had a Tony Blair moment, it seems, because the US is also not at all responsible for anything which has happened as a direct result of US-UK bombing of the Middle East, of sovereign nations at least there. The United States of, this is quote, the United States of America is not responsible for what happened in Libya, nor is it responsible for what is happening in Iraq today. And he was speaking at a press conference in Cairo after he had been to Egypt to visit the new government there. So no doubt then, neither he nor Blair nor Obama nor Cameron nor Haig is responsible for this little fact that there are now more displaced people in the world as a result of war than at any time since the Second World War. These are figures from the UNHCR, who say that 51.2 million people were forcibly displaced up to the end of 2013, 6 million more than the previous year. And it said that the Middle East and North Africa regions had 2.6 million refugees among them, and among them 401,000 from Iraq. So, of course, Kerry is right, and so is Blair. It's not their fault. It's ours, actually, because we pay their salaries and we vote them in. So we got to stop voting for them and stop paying our tax, in my opinion, until such times as these issues are resolved.
And these idiots are actually moved out of Parliament. Well, of course, if we're talking of wars, we should bring up InfoWars here, because over the weekend I was looking at a number of little videos where Alex Jones is warning that there's now a massive attempt to ban his websites, InfoWars and Prison Planet. and he's saying that basically over 700,000 American military personnel have now been blocked out from seeing his website information. And interestingly enough, the US government is saying that Alex Jones's site is extremist. And is dangerous, and it's causing trouble. So it's very interesting that if you speak out and you start to put some of the real facts out in the public domain, then what is the counter from both the British and the American government? Well, of course, it's you're telling the truth, you must be an extremist. Well, here are a couple of extremists. This is really an article of great interest from the Mirror. And basically, John Prescott, you remember him as the minister who was enjoying parties with his floozy in Westminster. And of course, if life was a little bit stressful, he was playing croquet on the lawn. I think he punched a member of the public once, or threw a punch anyway. So John Prescott, of course, a reliable, trustworthy MP. And in a Mirror article, he said that he's proud to have served with Tony Blair. But in the article, he goes on to say he can't agree that our invasion of Iraq did not contribute to the chaos and violence we see in the Middle East today. The truth is it did. So let's learn from the past and leave Iraq and its neighbours to sort out this mess. So what a wonderful statement. We've got Tony Blair creating what was clearly an unlawful war on a pack of lies of weapons of mass destruction. We now recognise that Iraq has been destroyed as a result of that unlawful policy. And Mucker Prescott simply says, well, let's leave the Iraqis to sort the mess out. I'd like to say that a much better plan of action would be to bring the whole of Tony Blair's government in front of an international war tribunal, and let's really sort out who's causing the violence in the country today. And I think I'd like Mr. Prescott to also appear.
I think they should actually all be just simply sent over to Iraq to start the rebuilding process.
And let the Iraqis sort the problem out. Yeah. I think that would be good. Anybody'd like to start a petition for that. Let's get Tony over to Iraq and allow the Iraqi people to judge him. I think that would be good use of time and effort. So, can we trust the BBC then to report what's going on? Well, of course we can't. And several people were kind enough to get in touch with us to say that there was a very big anti-austerity demo in London on Saturday, at least 50,000 people. But for some very strange reason, the BBC didn't actually report it. And there are a couple of the website, I think on this particular website, Mike, is it?
I absolutely recommend people go and have a look at Vox Political and listen to the little telephone call that he has with the BBC, because, of course, he doesn't actually manage to ever get through to somebody to speak to.
They put the phone down on him.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So the BBC eventually, of course, did put a little article up, a total of 6 lines of text. So the BBC clearly censoring the news, but they only did this because they were kind of cajoled and bullied into it by the number of people asking why it hadn't been reported.
Yeah.
So I've always found it actually more interesting to look at what isn't being reported rather than what is. What is, you can work out what the sort of propaganda agenda might be, but you get as good a picture of what the propaganda agenda might be from what isn't being reported. I'd just like to add something, Brian, because in this issue of the UK column, we had an article about the Free Press Association and getting people doing a bit of feeding into us about local events. So we, for example, didn't know about this demonstration, and I mean, part of that is because we're so busy looking at other things and researching specific things that we don't really get a chance to look at social media and so on. So please let us know if there's anything like this happening in your local area that you would like us to report in advance, then tell us about it.
And probably we need to say, people at the London end, you're obviously, or you're likely to be better connected than us all the way down here in distant Plymouth. So if you can give us a heads up, early warning of these sorts of events, then we get the opportunity to report them. But the good news is that free media all over the internet did get hold of this issue. So Pride's Purge here was yet another website actually saying what on earth is going on, that BBC simply doesn't report 50,000 people on the streets, but many overseas channels, certainly Russia Today covered it. 50,000 people demonstrating on the streets against austerity. BBC doesn't think it's newsworthy. Well, we would like to encourage people to get the latest edition of the UK column, 2 articles on the BBC. And this one, an analysis of what the BBC gets up to in foreign countries, including the Marshall Plan of the Mind, which was a programme set up in order to completely reframe public opinion in Kazakhstan. And I think you'll be fascinated to read that analysis. It also delves deeply into the BBC so-called charity media action. Of course, a charity overwhelmingly funded by British government sources, the UN, the US, and dear old Bill and Belinda Gates. But what is the BBC Media Action doing? Well, it's helping to install its own BBC-trained journalists in unstable countries. So it doesn't matter whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya, Ukraine, Kazakhstan. BBC Media Action has been in using government money to train its own people to give us clearly skewed reports from those parts of the globe, but also they are there to install the British government's agenda. So we're going to encourage you to have a look at those articles. And if you want to start your own research, simply Google BBC Media Action and really read their own website. Well, the media is clearly under an attack. It's not just from Leveson. There was a report by Guido Fawkes last week that people within the Telegraph were being sacked, and the rumour on the streets was that Benedict Brogan was one of the people who had been chopped. But the Telegraph has also been running for many years the so-called briefing sessions, and we had an email in saying that the author of the email said, I believe these Telegraph briefings are going to be chopped, and I think the reason that they're going to be dispensed with is the fact that they were just too accurate. So if anybody else has got any information on that, we'd be glad to receive it. Well, let's come back to the subject of media control in Scotland and Robert Greene. Very brief recap of what we reported last week, I beg your pardon. David Lease, chief reporter of the Herald Scotland, writing articles undermining the good work of Robert Greene and undermining the Holly Gregg abuse case. And we pointed out this was a NewsQuest paper, and NewsQuest, we've been told now repeatedly, has blocked any access via its internal servers to the Robert Greene site. We also brought up this gentleman, Peter Watson, from very powerful Scottish lawyers, Levy McRae, and surprise, surprise, NewsQuest is one of their clients, as is the Police Federation, Prison Officers Association, Dame Eilish Angelini, of course, the former Lord Advocate, and here we are, we've got good old NewsQuest. Well, let's come in from a different direction. These are the men controlling what happens in Scotland, and let's bring in Peter Watson again. We're going to recap just so that we understand everything that's there. This is the immense control. And where does it go now? Well, here is the blocking of Robert Greene's website from within NewsQuest. But what we were told over the weekend, that it's fascinating that the Justice Minister, Kenny McCaskill, just happens to be a former Levy and McRae lawyer. I'm sure that's only a coincidence. And Peter Watson himself has been involved with what's known as the McCluskey panel, which is the Scottish Leveson equivalent, designed to control the press in Scotland. And, oh dear, an input from Mr. McCaskill as well.
Now, I don't think it's unfair to say that actually Peter Watson is highly disliked within media circles in Scotland.
Indeed, yeah.
Yes, because he tends to be a bit heavy-handed with the media.
Well, according to the Scottish press reports, Mike, that the initial suggestions out of that McCluskey panel were that they were outrageously aggressive against the press and media in Scotland, so much so that some people in the establishment did actually speak out. But if you look at it as a spider's web, we've essentially got 4 people not only controlling the police and the justice system, but with that panel as well, we've got blatant control coming in over free speech in Scottish press and media. Should we be concerned? Well, we think we should. And we think you should be concerned because of this article from the Scottish Express, which says Queen's days are numbered in independent Scotland, according to the anti-monarchy movement. Well, if we have a look at things, we've got Alex Salmond at the moment, of course, who is driving independence for Scotland. That's independence as a vassal state of the EU. So we're going to ask the question, is he also part of the movement to destroy the monarchy? And if so, I think that's called treason. Should come in here. So some pretty serious stuff going on here. This is not just independence for Scotland. This would potentially create a hostile country north of Hadrian's Wall.
Yes. Well, it is anyway, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I think we're bringing it home. Where does it take us? Well, it takes us to this, and thank you very much for the person that flagged this one up, that if you check the Department for Work and Pensions website, you will see that they are talking about bringing people into your homes, should be able to call it up here somewhere, where they're going to come and ask you a number of questions. And the visit's going to last up to an hour, could be longer. They want to interview you in your home. They want to see 2 forms of identification. They'll also ask to see documents about money, savings, rent. And you won't know when they're going to come, but if you need to, you can reschedule this home visit. If anybody's worried about what's going on there, this was the number on this document. Whether that is still working or not, I don't know. But this is a pretty frightening intrusion of people's homes and privacy, I think. I
think we've just got to say, put the notice up outside, remove the implied right of access, do not let these types of people into your homes. Now, of course, there may be consequences to that, because if you don't allow them in and comply with what they're asking for, they may decide to stop benefits.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, this type of behaviour isn't going to reduce in the coming years. It's going to increase. And if we don't start doing something about it now, we've only got ourselves to blame, I think.
This is absolutely true. And of course, the key thing we continue to warn about is the fact that your children are no longer safe from the government.
Yeah, well, this was a staggering article in the BBC, because they were bragging about it, I suppose. Thousands of mothers have multiple babies removed, and what they're saying is that the BBC has learned. I mean, we've only been telling people this for how many years? But the BBC has finally learned this, that apparently for the past 7 years, 7,143 mothers were involved in repeat care cases. So this is multiple children being taken away. And that involves 22,790 children. And of course, this is a relatively small number of the families that are involved, because these are families that are specifically having multiple children taken away. Other families are only having single children taken away. So I'd like to know what the overall figure for the number of children affected by this is. And of course, these children end up in the care system and eventually through a raft of court cases and probably adoption at the end of the day, but certainly plenty of time in foster care at £450 a week each.
What we should add, of course, is that a few years ago, I think it would have been about 5 years ago, the BBC itself was part of a programme called an initiative called Children Wanted. And they were helping to print very glossy magazines in which, as we said at the time, children were being advertised like puppy dogs. This was for fostering and adoptive homes, so pictures shown of these very young children. When we contacted the BBC to say how many of these children have been taken from their parents without their parents giving consent to this action, it went very, very quiet. we were passed to a lady consultant who'd been working with the BBC. She gave us one very short telephone call, and then that was the last we saw of her. So the BBC, of course, totally disingenuous, because they've been working with these programmes to help take children away from their parents. So I'm pretty sure the BBC knows pretty accurately how many children are disappearing. Well, concerns on... Sorry, I should come back to this one. I think this was yours.
Yeah. So this is MP Simon Danchuk, according to International Business Times, says that he is prepared to name a living paedophile politician, but only under the circumstances that he is asked when he appears in front of the Home Office Select Committee on the 1st of July. So he is Labour MP for Rochdale. He's the guy that blew the whistle on Cyril Smith. And he is going to be in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee concerning allegations around Elm Guesthouse. But I mean, you had an opinion on this, Brian?
Well, I'm highly suspicious about what's going on. I'm told that there's some 60 MPs that are now joined the campaign for a major investigation into child safeguarding in this country. What I'm concerned about is that we're not seeing these people speak out in their sole capacity as an MP. They're sort of grouping together in Westminster, and we're not being given any detail. So what actually is going on here? My fear is that we're going to see a puppet show to do with the safety of children. We're going to see a certain number of paedophiles at relatively low level exposed, and then the government is going to say, well, we've got such a dangerous system, we need to adopt the Scottish system of an appointed social services person at birth. So I may be being very pessimistic there, but I am suspicious until we start to see people at the top end of the paedophile ring. We're talking members of the establishment and, of course, Westminster being tried and subsequently being imprisoned for their paedophile activities.
But you were sort of questioning why Mr. Danchuk doesn't just name this MP.
Well, indeed, he said he'll name him if he's asked the question. Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I just wondered whether this was something to do with parliamentary privilege and the protection that gives. But on the other hand, if he has the evidence for it, I don't see why he wouldn't just name the MP, or at least go to the police.
Yeah. Well, and on the subject of the police, we'll be talking about the police in a minute, but we're hearing some very distressing rumours that the police seem to be ramping up their actions in support of social services, so police prepared to falsify reports in order to help social services take children. And in some parts of the country at the moment, it would appear that child abuse witnesses are being psychologically abused by the police. Again, the police making false accusations against these people who've been brave enough to speak out. We will report more on that when we get the full picture. Well, where does that take us? It takes us to Russia. And this is a charity which has been flagged up. I think it's based in Ireland, To Russia with Love, and it's all about changing the lives of abandoned children. And I'm sure many people would say this is a wonderful charity. It's interesting that people overseas are also worried about what's happening with children. And we were sent this email. Hi, Brian. I was reading an expat magazine, Moscow Expat Life, working and living in Moscow this morning, and saw the following articles. Kids Save, Monica Bellucci and Dolce and Gabbana, if I've got that right, helped raise over $12,000 in support of Kids Save Teen Mother Programme at the dinner organised by Procter & Gamble. Through its programmes, Kids Saves make sure that every child grows up in a family with love and hope for a successful future. I looked at the sponsors of Kids Save and noted some very big US energy, Pepco, finance and investment companies. The slogan is, let's move 1 million kids into loving families by 2020. And this person's commented, very worrying. A few pages later, there's a 4-page article on adoption concerning To Russia with Love. And this is about orphans and adoption, and again has some major sponsors, i.e. Google. It's the same stuff in Russia. Cheers, Steve. So it is interesting how people across the world are picking up that this is something, what is going on with children, huge charities popping up, very big backers and funders. And
it's just to make
trade, is it?
Well, it is trafficking, isn't it?
Yeah.
But of course, it's all for the benefit of the children.
We'll leave people to have a look at that. And another interesting email that we had was alerting us, this may be a bit small, but it was a BBC article, 38 police officers leave while facing conduct inquiries. And these related to many different accusations against the police. 38 police officers in England and Wales have left the service in the past 4 years, avoiding inquiries into their conduct and possible disciplinary action. And what's particularly worrying is that some of these incidents at least relate to deaths in custody. In the 29 investigations, 26 officers retired and 12 resigned. What's interesting is this lady pops up. We're going to give a quote by her in a moment. This is Cleveland Chief Constable Jackie Cheer, the lady who was too overweight to complete the fitness test of her own officers. But of course, we reported that it was Cleveland police that essentially attacked a mother and her daughter and used physical violence and resulting gas burns. So bruises in the left-hand picture, gas burns in the right-hand picture. So just remember that lady. Here's the BBC article, and Sean Rigg is mentioned. He died supposedly of cardiac failure in Brixton Police Station in 2008. Let's have a look at what Jackie Cheer has to say. She said, where officers resign during the course of gross misconduct proceedings, they often do so as a result of the strength of evidence against them and an acceptance that dismissal is inevitable. By resigning at this early stage, the expense of the service and taxpayers of carrying out an extended investigation is saved. So this is about saving money. Officers or staff who resign in the face of a gross misconduct investigation can then be placed on the College of Policing's disapproved register, which prevents them from re-entering the service. And this lady apparently thinks this should be reassuring to the public. I'll pause there because words sort of fail me, but I think we've got some very, very dangerous people at the top of the police. So we probably better move on to this Telegraph article that Britain is going to face the costs of Islamic extremism for many years. Cressida Dick says this, common purpose guru, of course, and she says that we face a long-term consequence as a result of the Syria conflict. But many people will not be aware that Ms. Dick stated in the Jewish Chronicle on the 19th of May 2014 that throughout her service she's worked very closely with Jewish community groups, never more than I currently do in counter-terrorism. Now, I'm slightly puzzled by this. Does it mean that she's got questions to raise against those community groups? Or are Britain's police working with community groups that the public at large haven't got a clue what they're doing?
Yeah, it's not very clear.
It's not clear, is it? What is clear is that questions have been raised against this lady, and even the BBC managed to say, well, it's interested that the woman in charge of the Dominion's affair was promoted, and they then give a profile on Commander Cressida Dick, where, of course, many of her colleagues were saying that essentially she made very poor to disastrous decisions on the day, and others have spoken of incompetence.
But I'm sure they didn't mention common purpose.
They didn't mention common purpose. The only organisation that's, apart from CP Exposed and the UK column, that's gone for the common purpose link is the Daily Mail, which pointed out in its Leveson article that Cressida Dick was not only fighting worldwide terrorism, she was also called in front of the Leveson inquiry to say how the government needed to be in control of the press.
Is Common Purpose not a subversive organisation?
In my opinion, Mike, which
so
I think...
How do you fight worldwide terrorism if in the process you're committing possibly treason, but certainly subversion?
Well, we need the terrorism to create the wars to make the profit.
Okay.
I think we'll leave it there. I'm going to pass this one over to you because I was very interested to see Peter Hitchens say that we're grovelling to the Chinese now.
I don't think we're grovelling to the Chinese. I think the Chinese is buying up huge quantities of real estate and other physical assets, including power stations, as we've mentioned many times, as a direct result of the amount of money that China has and the fact that we're continuing to peddle the lie that we don't have any money. And so all I can say to this is, well, let's make 2 points. First of all, I'm aware of some property in London, which really, as far as a family home goes, it's pretty average and is probably saleable for about £850,000 if a certain Chinese buyer came along with cash to buy it.
Right.
So this is a ridiculous situation where in London house prices are so beyond the means of just about everybody that actually lives there. So we've got all this Chinese money coming in and buying up property, along with the hedge fund money as well, of course. You know, Bradbury Pound, if we want to build some power stations, we can do it ourselves. We don't need Chinese money for that. We've made the point many times that it is a security issue for the nation, and we should be dealing with that by paying for it ourselves.
Absolutely. That's aside from the defence issue of allowing a communist country to come in and build our strategic infrastructure.
Right.
That's presumably why people vote Tory.
So over the weekend, then Argentina placed an ad in the Wall Street Journal, full-page advertisement entitled "Argentina wants to continue paying its debts, but they won't let it." So who's they? Well, Argentina, as people may know, experienced a debt crisis around the turn of the century after about 10 years of IMF intervention during the 1990s. Debt repayments had reached 45% of Argentina's total export revenues, and those caused poverty in Argentina to rise from 3% of the population to over 20% of the population. The government of Argentina managed to make a deal to restructure their debt with most of their creditors to pay 30 cents on the dollar, and since 2005 they've kept that deal. And in fact, they've reversed the extreme poverty situation, and that's once again fallen below the 2% level. However, a couple of hedge funds, such as NML Capital and Aurelius, they decided to buy up some of the Argentine debt after Argentina, after the restructuring. And of course, they bought it up pretty inexpensively. And despite the fact that they didn't personally lend Argentina any money, these people are now demanding that they pay the debt in full, which would net Aurelius Capital and NML Capital a profit of around 1,400%. And now they've managed to convince the court in New York, the Supreme Court, that Argentina should either pay them in full or not pay anybody. So Argentina's taken out this advertisement because of this ridiculous being held to ransom by vultures, people that indeed are really looking for some nice wars around the world in order to make some more profit. Now, interestingly enough, in 2010, the UK government, as a result of pressure from this organisation, the UK government passed legislation which made it illegal for these vulture funds, as they're known, to make exorbitant profits from debt restructuring. Certainly in the UK, you know, if they're based in the UK. And in October last year, Early Day Motion 666 was created, and that has now over 100 signatories. And that Early Day Motion says this House welcomes the impact of the Debt Relief Developing Countries Act 2010 in preventing vulture funds taking an estimated £145 million from developing countries. Further welcomes the passing of similar laws in Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man, notes that the vulture funds are trying to force Argentina to default on its debt through a legal case in New York. Further notes that vulture funds are making large profits on Greek debt repayments owed under UK law, despite other creditors agreeing a reduction in the amount that they owed. Is concerned that the vulture funds are preventing the fair implementation of debt restructuring, and urges the government to share its experience of legislating on vulture funds with the US administration, bringing forward legislative proposals to prevent vulture funds ignoring international agreed debt restructuring for Argentina and Greece in the UK courts, and support the creation of a fair, independent and transparent arbitration mechanism for sovereign debt. Now, I think this is something that every MP should have signed, and perhaps if you go and have a look at early day motion 666 and have a look and see whether your MP is signed or not, and perhaps put a little bit of pressure on your MP if they haven't. I think it's also a disgrace that only one Tory MP, that's Simon Revell, has signed. No other Tory MP has signed. But really, this case highlights that it's not just individuals, us, that are having debt that we may owe being bought up by third parties, and then the thugs coming out to try and recover it from us. It's happening on a national and international level as well.
They're only talking about 145 million there, Mike. Yeah, that seems a crumb on the debt table.
Well, indeed, but of course, for some of these countries, it's a fatal amount of money because people are dying as a result of having to service that debt. And if you look on the website for the Jubilee organisation, sorry, I can't remember their exact name. If you have a look on their website, they have a debt map which shows the proportion of debt to GDP that countries are carrying to international organisations like the IMF and these other organisations. But anyway, we've got good news moving on, because GDP is up by £10 billion overnight. Now, how did this happen, you may ask? No, it's as the result of EU orders which require EU member states to include the turnover of such activities as prostitutes and drug dealers. Yes, indeed. Prostitution,
that's it.
I do apologise. Yeah. Prostitution and drug dealing are now required to be part of the GDP statistics submitted to the EU. The French have said they are going to refuse to comply. Spain and Belgium have already joined. The UK joined a couple of weeks ago, I believe. Germany, Hungary, Austria and Greece already include prostitution but not drugs, so they're going to have to include drugs. And of course the Netherlands already includes drugs because most drugs are legal over there.
So this is the European Union that I think we're in the 18th year, still no signed audited accounts.
Yes, indeed. All member states must adopt the 2010 version of the European System of Accounts by September 2014. So by September, we must all be submitting fraudulent accounts.
Yeah, we don't want accurate signed off accounts. We don't want that. We definitely want to get in the drugs and the prostitution to help sort of blur the mix a bit, presumably. Well, or are prostitutes particularly good at filling in their sort of tax returns so they can?
It may be, but this is GDP, and really what the EU is attempting to do is to give a better impression of GDP based on black market activity rather than normal everyday economic activity. So we're seeing this being included in the statistics because this type of black market activity is becoming a larger proportion of the overall economic picture, and we've got to understand what that means.
Is Mr. Osborne a fan of this then, including prostitutes and drugs?
Well, you may well say that, but I couldn't possibly comment.
Yeah, we're not actually making this up for anybody who's not able to see the expression on our faces. This is the reality of the news in UK and European Union, not reported on the BBC, of course.
Right, the infrastructure bill has had its second reading of the House of Lords last Wednesday. Almost no media coverage. We didn't notice it at the time, but I've noticed it now. And just thought we should go down through the list of things that are in this bill, because it's quite incredible. First of all, roads. The bill will turn the Highways Agency into a government-owned company.
That's ready for Mr. Rothschild.
Ready for sale, absolutely. So we're really talking privatisation on a massive scale here. Apparently, it will also provide for stable long-term funding for national strategic road infrastructure projects. Would be due. That's in time to be sold off, quite sure. Invasive non-native species. The bill will provide more power to control the invasive non-native species that pose serious threats to biodiversity, apparently. Well, that's good. Nationally significant infrastructure project is going to simplify and speed up measures introduced in the Planning Act for handling minor changes to existing planning permissions. So that's all about seizing public land without permission and these kind of things. It's public sector land assets is included in this. So they're setting up the Homes and Communities Agency. That already exists. It's got a separate website, but that's all going to be brought into the government web infrastructure pretty soon. And it will make future purchases of land owned by the Homes and Communities Agency and Greater London Authority. They'll be able to develop and use land without being affected by easements and other rights and restrictions suspended by the agency. So it's about getting around various rules and regulations. And it will also allow the Land Registry to take on statutory responsible for local land charges register, and an extension of powers would also allow the Land Registry to play a wider role in the property market. Now, not many people know that may appreciate this, but the Land Registry is actually in the process of being sold off at the moment. And in fact, Land Registry staff were out on strike in May as a result of that, because they do not want to be privatised in this way. So we're seeing the infrastructure bill being used as a massive pathway to privatisation.
Yeah,
and getting our infrastructure in a position to be privatised, I think, is the main issue.
And it will also assist, of course, the unlawful taking of property, as we've been reporting with the fraudulent court documents.
Right.
Counterfeit, I think, is one of the words that's been suggested to us. Counterfeit court documents.
Indeed. Okay, banking then. So this is another report, this time from Berenberg. They have produced a report detailing their concerns about the European banking sector. We covered this issue with regard to the derivatives black hole a week or two ago, but they're also pointing out that a €300 billion euro shortfall remains in on the balance sheets of European banks. Looking at various ratios and stress tests, we believe that the European banks have a shortfall of around 300 billion euros, down from 400 billion euros a year ago. Well, that's okay. It's down a bit. They're also concerned about derivatives, as I say, and they reckon that the European banks' gross derivatives asset exposure is looking at around 10.8 trillion. Equivalent to 70% of the US economy. JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, Barclays and Bank of America have the largest exposure of around $1 trillion each. So, still plenty to go as far as European banks are concerned. They're still utterly bankrupt, and more pressure on us as individuals through bailout and bail-in. Watch this space.
That's correct. A few people are saying in the chat box, is there any good news? Well, it's a bit perverse, but we're going to say we think the good news is it is becoming so obvious what's actually happening. And of course, if it's very obvious to all of us, we can sell that message across to other people out there who are just starting to wake up. But we'll end on a good news slide. So Veterans News Now is carrying a particularly interesting article, which is discussing really the infighting which is now occurring in the US power elite. And of course, this is also going on in UK. The cracks are beginning to come in the system. As the pressure comes on, we can expect to see people on the wrong side of the line breaking ranks. And in our view, the good news is that pure people power, no violence, simply the exposure and the pressure is capable of doing what's needed to the other side. So let us keep pushing to bring Tony Blair to justice for the unlawful overseas wars, and we might as well bring in John Prescott as well and the rest of the administration. And I think my brilliant idea that they're simply shipped over to Iraq for justice probably be a lot less corrupt than the law courts in UK or even The Hague.
Indeed.
William, we should include William, of course.
Yes.
Dropped him into the mix. Sorry.
I've got a request to make.
Yes.
Very keen, if somebody lives in the Salisbury area, if you could head over to Salisbury Cathedral and get me a reasonably good quality image of the Magna Carta that's there. If you could, please. Anybody that's able to do that would be fantastic.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Okay, and do remember, if you're out there and can get us photographs or warn us of events coming up, we try and scan as much as we can, but we do miss things. But big demonstrations, I know there's one being planned to do with children involving the M25. I will be speaking to that team, but this is just sort of the information. It's why we are here, to help get this stuff out. So if you've got a lazy afternoon, can we make a suggestion? You don't have a lazy afternoon, but you get out there starting to put some real pressure on your MPs. It is important that we do this, and the people we also need to focus on are those 60 MPs who say they are finally calling for a full investigation into what is clearly state-run child trafficking and abuse in UK.
Don't forget Crane report at 7:30 tonight and Fracking Nightmare at 9 p.m. Hope to see you all there.
Okay, and we'll leave you from a very, very hot studio. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.